yeah, it sucks 2005 when Hamas got elected into power. Yeah, no one wants that, but that's what ended up happening. And you have to like kind of peel the layers. And it's like, well, Israel put them in this position where the people that were at the bottom of the totem pole, the angry, whatever, nationalists, whatever you want to call Hamas, they rose up and they took power. And it's not like all those people agreed to that. So, you know, I think Dave, for the most part, he made solid points. It was just very hard to see eye to eye with Douglas on many things, even though I know his greater thesis is like down the road. What does this mean for these echo chambers? It's dangerous. Yeah, I get that. You know, I hear you, but you're not looking at, maybe it's because we're Americans and we have free speech and we have this Constitution thing, and they don't have that in, you know,
they would never do that in Britain.
Yeah, but it's
they'll just storm into your house when you tweet something instead.
Exactly. So like, part of me thinks like maybe this is a difference of freaking just like what our whole basic, you know, government's built upon. We're here. It's like we have this thing called free speech, and yeah, I don't like these freaking trans people that are saying that men should be in women's sports. I think that groups are a bunch of idiots. However, they should have a platform. They should say what they 100%. Want. If they have followers and people love that, go for it. You know, I think, you know, the whole idea is pretty dumb. And like I said, you go into any podcast where they're debating, they get owned pretty badly every time. It's like, well, just let them have
That's how it's done.
Yeah, right. The flat earthers too. They could be there too. Whatever groups that want, they should be able to speak. But it's like, maybe it's the British idea where it's like the right ideas have to be always at the forefront. Any fringe ideas, conspiratorial, they should be removed to the bottom. Like, they shouldn't even be talked about. And it's like, one, that's bad. But two, it's also like those ideas are kind of fun to play with sometimes. Like, sometimes you want to have these discussions because it's like, well, why do they think that way? What is the freaking brainwashing taking place here? Like, you know, that's how I see it.
Well, it's no surprise that he's coming from that angle too, because I don't know much about him, but if I had to flip a coin, I'd guess that he's probably a royalist too.
I think he might be, actually.
Probably is.
Let me check that.
So, again, I don't know shit. I'm not going to claim an expert in anything. But if I had to guess, he's probably a royalist, and it's no surprise because
first thing on Google, Joe. A Hereditary Monarchy is Good for Politics by Douglas Murray.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so exactly. It's like, I wonder how he felt about the IRA, you know? So it's like...
That was spot on analysis right there.
It's just like, man, shit. I'm a comedian and an expert.
Yeah. But that's his whole point too. He's just like, these comedians are these people that pick up an interest in these crazy topics. Shouldn't be on these platforms. Like, that's kind of what he was getting at.
That like, was crazy work to me to say that, because, by the way, Douglas Murray, one of the reasons you exist is because a comedian put you the fuck on so many times in Joe Rogan. Like, he's it's almost like he was saying, I don't want you to platform anyone, and then Joe's like, but what about you? And he's like, not like that. You know, like I liked it when we could come in here and me and Sam Harris could say what we wanted to say and tell you who to bring on here. And then the minute you color it outside the lines, bad Joe. Bad Joe.
Yeah, and like the Hamas thing was what drove me nuts. He's like, so you haven't seen the crossroads? He's like, you know, as a journalist, my rule is always I should go to the places where this is happening. And I'm like, shut up.
Yeah, what a prick, dude.
I'm like, shut up, dude. Like, so we can't talk about anything. If I've never been to Vietnam, I can't talk about the Vietnam. You know, like... What type of argument is that? That's just so dumb.
I have not been to like half the places I talk about. I haven't done half the things I talk. Like,
yeah, I mean, because he said he was like, no, never been. Your point, and he was just like,
yeah, but like, you know what he said too? He said this. Oh, you know, I could start to begin to understand where your thought process. I'm like.
You're reading things, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm like, dude, like...
You're reading those books again.
Yeah.
Those books should be burned.
But then he kept saying this thing, which was crazy. He's like, so you listen to world leaders. Like, whenever, like, Dave was like, oh, like, well, Netanyahu and this world leader said this and so this. He's like, oh, so the liberals going to listen to the world leaders. That's a source. Interesting. And you're like... So I can't use it as a source, but then he's like, oh, and you can't use Wikipedia. So
Very
I'm like, so what are the sources here? I don't even know what I can even read. Like, should I even believe anything?
He wants them to be wearing little nightcaps and have candles and read old tomes, because that's what English people, they read old tomes, and he's like, oh, well, this tome suggests.
Oh my God, Joe, what is he? Because been a stand-up comic on the scene in New York in the past, and I guess Dave runs in those circles. Like, what's like Dave's reputation among the stand-up comedy community?
I
Did
feel
they
like-
view him as a comic first, or are they viewing him more as a thought leader first now?
I feel like over the years it's starting to go towards like thought leader, because he's gotten more, like he's always been deep in it, but like the last few years, like especially, he's like deeper than ever. When I was doing it, I was going to like Legion of Skanks every Monday at the Stand. That's his podcast with Big J and Louis J. Gomez.
Yeah.
And if I had to say, I feel like he was always like third in line, you know?
Yeah.
So I could see now
That's
why
interesting.
he's being labeled as like the thought leader more than comic, but I think he's a good comic though too, with all that said.
Yeah. So I think you made a lot of great points, Alessi. That was one of those, once in a while there's a Joe Rogan podcast that the minute it drops, you're watching that.
I was the same way. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, I was like, oh, inject this straight into my... Jimmy and me listened to it on like 2.0 speed too, which was quite the trip, listening to Dave Smith talk on 2.0.
Yeah.
But, you know, there's no way we'll be able to actually get to everything and what it all was, because there were just so many little moments in there where you're like, wait a minute, or what? You know, what was that? But I was on the phone with Paul Rosalie yesterday, and we were talking about, you know, he and I have had, and I promise this is going to tie into everything, people. He and I have had a friendly disagreement about colossal biosciences, the people bringing back the extinct species and all that for the last couple years. And so obviously when this news dropped a week ago with Joe Rogan bringing on the founder, Ben Lamb, which, by the way, I don't know if you know this, but that podcast has been on the schedule like 2-3 times before. This is like we'll make it happen at some point. But anyway, so that makes all the news, and now Paul's really becoming outspoken about it because, I mean, I'll let him get into all the details of it, but it has to do with some of the conservation that's not actually conservation, and he thinks some of it's being mismarketed, and it's not a real species, and he's talked with a lot of scientists about this over the past couple of years. I do know that, and there's a lot of people who have an issue with it. Either way. He called me up and went on an 11-minute rant, which was pretty much me just laughing the whole time, and I didn't say a word. But one of the things he said in there that had nothing to do with, obviously, this podcast that happened yesterday with Joe Rogan. He probably didn't even know anything about that, but he was talking about the way that like news spreads now and how people's brands are built, which also, not for nothing, is how any brand is built on a podcast. But what he was saying is that in this long-form podcast universe, you can now put someone in a studio for a few hours, let them talk like a real human being, and they can be friendly and even seem well-intentioned to the point that you start to mistake their intentions for what they're actually doing. Mm-hmm. And when he said that, I was like, whoa, say that again. And he said it more profoundly than that. And when I heard it again, it all clicked for me because I'm like, oh my God, that's it. He's got it nailed. This is the downside of what we do. And it's not just Joe Rogan, it's all of us. It's me too. It's everyone who's in this space. And that is, you develop a relationship with someone when you're talking with them as a human being that sometimes you can miss, like the fact that maybe they're actually missing on it. It's not because they're a bad guy or lying or something like that. They're just missing the fucking plot here, but they're coming across in a way that you want to believe them. And I bring this up because I think one of the things that was the most disappointing to me is that, you know, Douglas Murray blew an amazing opportunity in the first 20 minutes. I'm not talking about the Israel stuff. They weren't talking about that yet. Mm-hmm. Douglas Murray and I have some differences on how he looks at Israel, just as I have some differences with Dave Smith on that. You know, the extremes on that issue certainly are all over the place. But when he brought up Daryl Cooper to Joe, I am no fan of Daryl Cooper. I can see right through that guy. I was really disappointed in that podcast, actually, when Joe did it. I'm not disappointed in him electing to use free speech and talk to the guy at all. And that's what Douglas Murray seemed to be getting at. Like, you shouldn't talk to this guy or whatever. And, like, I don't think that's the case. What I think is that when you listen to Daryl talk, he comes across as a normal, like, buddy, wants to, just, trying to get to the truth here kind of guy that will inject some ideas that are presented in a way that something that is actually ridiculous and sometimes just straight up fucking crazy sounds normal. And Joe, for whatever reason, on this one, I think maybe it's because he's only talked to him once. He can't see through this yet. But, you know, I think as condescending and brutal and totally blowing it as Douglas Murray was, there were a few points in those first 20, 25 minutes where Joe was kind of digging in on the Daryl Cooper hill, and I'm like, oh, you can't see this. Guys like Daryl Cooper, here's what they do. They anchor you. They come out, they're a troll. Like, you need to go read. Forget just his podcast and whatever. And by the way, like Joe saying he's done a 31-hour podcast, that's not a qualification. There are guys
Cory Booker was on the Senate floor for 25 hours.
Yeah. There's guys who have done 31-hour live streams on 4chan, and that's not a qualification. So when he said that, I was like, well, that was fucking retarded, but whatever. You know, like, if you go read what Daryl writes in his fucking very long threads on Twitter, and you go read his back and forth over the years with people. Thank you guys for checking out this clip. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. It is a huge, huge help. And if you'd like to check out this clip's full podcast episode, that link is in the description below or right here. And finally, you can follow me on Instagram and X by using the links in my description below.